think as has already been described by a few different people, the idea that birds are sentient is probably not a controversial one. If we're purely thinking about things like do they experience pain, do they experience suffering, I would think it's fairly easy to argue that there's no debate there among any researchers looking at birds that this is possible for them to experience. What I would like to talk a little bit more about is the idea of consciousness and intelligence and some of these more higher order capacities and how that informs some of our discussions about sentience in these species and in other species. I think it's really important to bear in mind that we can only ever infer cognitive abilities from behaviour. This is largely the issue that we've talked about in terms of the 1950s in terms of behaviourists, where it came to the realisation that actually we can't just assume that animals have deep feelings, have motivations, have subjective experiences, because we can't measure them. We can only measure their outward behaviour. What I would like to talk about just briefly in this talk is some of these examples, purely looking at behaviour, that we do now think demonstrate intelligence in animals, particularly focusing on areas that relate to consciousness in terms of subjective experience of one's own past and one's own future, as well as some capacities for reasoning. And then I'd just like to, given that we are here thinking about some of the questions about where we draw the lines in terms of sentience, take a few lessons from work that's been done in comparative cognition about drawing lines in terms of what animal is more intelligent than other animals, and how that might relate to determining sentience. So I just want to start by talking about episodic memories, which is sort of summed up in this little cartoon saying, "Hey Sid, remember that time last summer when we were gathered around the kill like this? Someone told that leopard joke and you laughed so hard an antler came out of your nose." What we've got is an example of a situation where an animal is remembering a particular time where they were in a location, something happened, and it was a certain amount of time ago. This formed the basis of some research that I did about 20 years ago now, but it still sort of remains the most similar work in this area of determining, do animals actually have these sort of episodic memories that we have. It was conducted on scrub jays, the time of COVID, published in Nature about 20 years ago, and it provided, at least from a behavioural point of view, that animals, this species, can remember what happened, where and when in their own personal past. I think it's important just to go through how this research is actually conducted. So the key bits of information we need to know are scrub jays are a species of bird that cache food, which they retrieve later. They cache a variety of different types of food. Some of that includes worms, which will decay if they're left for long periods of time. So they're only good to eat if you recover them quite quickly. Or nuts, which you can cache, you can come back to a long period of time later, they're still good to eat. In these experiments, what would happen is the scrub jay is given a choice of two locations which they can cache in, which are visually different. So in these cases, with little Lego or Duplo box indicating differences of the two locations. Both of them were present, only one was accessible to the bird at a particular period of time. So the first time the bird experiences this experiment, they're given a bowl of mealworms. They have both caching trays there, one's covered with perspex, so they can only cache the food in one of them. A bit of time passes, and then the bird is given another type of food, in this case nuts, and is able to cache them in the other tray. Some more time passes. And then what we care about is what the animal does when they are given the opportunity to retrieve both caches. So both trays are present, this time no perspex in either of them, it can go to either one first to search for food. In one situation, what we've got, if this little box indicates the two caching trays, they've cached nuts first on the left. 120 hours later, they cache worms on the right. 4 hours later, the bird gets a chance to retrieve the caches. Compare this with the other situation where what we got to do was cache the worms first, then cache the nuts. These birds prefer worms. If the worms are available, they would like to get them. And there were 2 groups. So the first was sort of a natural situation where the worms would degrade over time. So if 4 hours have passed, the worms are still fine, you can go get your worms. If a lot longer had passed, the worms are not available. They're just a bit disgusting, you don't really want to eat them. So what we expect is if the bird actually remembers these distinct caching events, when they've cached the worms recently, they should search for the worms. When they cached the worms a long time ago, they should search for the nuts. And we compared this with a control group where the worms were artificially replenished. So these birds learned that whenever they got worms, whenever they'd catch the worms, they'd still be fine to go again. In that case, we'd expect them to search for the worms whenever they catch them. So this is the exact pattern of results we found. In the degrade group, where worms were only edible after a short window, birds went for the worms when they cached them recently, didn't when they cached them a long time ago. So they'd really be able to distinguish between those 2 separate events. And importantly, remembered how long ago each one occurred. When they were replenished, the birds just always went for worms because they love worms. So to our knowledge at this point, this is still the best evidence we have that behaviourally, birds are capable of remembering specific events in their own past. Alongside this work, so we tend to think of episodic memory in the context of something called mental time travel. So the reason you have memories of your own past is also to be able to imagine and anticipate events in the future. That's the reason these capacities are likely to have evolved. So looking at scrub jays again, they also seem to demonstrate some knowledge, some behavioural evidence for future planning. This was a study where scrub jays were kept in one compartment with a food bowl. They had access to a range of different foods in the morning of each day, they were either left in compartment A, and wake up in compartment A, in which case they were given some breakfast, or they were left in compartment C, and they'd wake up and they got no breakfast. After experiencing that for a couple of days, when they were given food that they could cache, they selectively cached that food in the room in which they had no breakfast. So it seemed to indicate that they could prepare for the fact that at some point I might be kept in this room, I'm not going to have any breakfast, this will be the location that I'll keep food. Final one which we asked from Jays is one study that looked at whether they could anticipate a different motivational state that is not the same as the one they're currently experiencing. So again, in the context of caching food, sorry, I'm going to stand in front of this the whole time, I think. In this experiment, it involved two time periods, one when they would cache food and one when they would retrieve the food. And they were pre-fed food before each occasion. This relied on the idea of specific satiety, that if you eat one thing, so say you've just eaten loads of sausage rolls, at some point you're going to get really sick of sausage rolls, but maybe you would quite like a piece of cake. To indicate that although they might not want one particular type of food, they might still be hungry for a different type of food. So at the first time period, they fed the scrub jays peanuts, and then gave them a choice of two different foods that they could cache, either peanuts or kibble. And if you base their choice purely on what they currently desire, currently they're probably not very keen on peanuts, they've had a lot of peanuts, they should probably cache kibble. But what then happened is at the time of retrieval, the bird would be pre-fed a huge amount of kibble. So at this point, the bird doesn't particularly want kibble anymore. It's then given the opportunity to retrieve the cached food. If, as is most likely the first time they catch kibble, at this point it's not a very happy bird, it's just got more kibble, or it's just had its kibble, it does not want any more kibble. one trial, then repeating this experience for multiple times, by the time it came to trial 2, the birds no longer cached peanut, no longer cached kibble, which they wanted at the time of caching. Instead, they cached peanuts, which they might want in the future. So it seems to indicate that these birds are capable of preparing for potentially a specific event in the future and directing their behaviour towards that. Moving away from mental time travel, some of the other areas where we're seeing a lot of interesting work, particularly in corvids, is the idea of reasoning. I predominantly work with New Caledonian crows. They are a species that manufactures tools in the wild, and a lot of the most unexpected, very wide range of behaviours. This study was one which made use of the fact that these birds use tools, and in order to use those tools, they need to bend their head down and sort of fiddle around in the ground. In this case, fiddling around in this log, which has got some worms on the backside, with a tool to try and get that food out. And this is potentially quite a risky behaviour if you've got predators, if you've got threats nearby, because you are diverting your attention away from your surroundings purely into engaging in that tool use. What happened in this experiment is that from this little white patch here, a very large log would dramatically protrude, shake around a bit in this space here, which is exactly where the bird would need to bend and put its head. Sorry I don't have a video of it exactly. It looks a bit ridiculous as a situation, but it's quite threatening to the bird. But what would happen is that birds seem to be able to identify particular causes for that behaviour. So if they saw a human walk into this blue hide, and then the stick started probing in and out, and then the human left, the birds would come down and they were quite happy to probe and search for food, and they wouldn't spend too much time looking at this blue hide. If all the birds saw was the stick probing in and out of the hide, they didn't see any human come in and out, essentially there's no cause that they can attribute the movement of that stick to, they were much more likely to keep looking up and inspecting that hide instead of probing for food. So their behaviour changed quite dramatically depending on whether there was something in their external environment they could attribute the probing stick to. A final one I'll mention in terms of reasoning is just a study that came out a few months ago, where we were looking at what these birds might understand about physical properties of objects in the world, and how much information they can absorb purely from their own observations rather than interactions with objects. What we did in this experiment was train birds that they could drop light or heavy small objects into a tube, and they would get some rewards from a dispenser. Half the birds learned that light was rewarded, half the birds learned that heavy was rewarded. Then we gave them some novel objects that they'd never had a chance to actually pick up and handle, so they didn't know whether these objects were heavy or light. But what we did do was suspend them in front of a fan. So we've got the two objects just down there on the left, heavy one staying completely still and the light one blowing around. That was all the exposure that they had to these objects. Oh, a little bit jumpy. But simply from watching and observing that situation, the bird was able to come and select the correct object to drop into the tube. In this case, the bird needed to choose a light object, but equally, birds trained to choose heavy objects, the one that would remain stationary, were fully able of selecting the correct object and dropping that into the tube. Cool. So this is a very, very quick summary of some of the evidence that's coming out to date in terms of the capabilities of corvids in particular. And I think we've got very good behavioural evidence now that animals do remember elements from their past, project to the future, that they are capable of reasoning, there is still a huge amount of debate about what that actually means in terms of animal subjective experience. So we're certainly leaning far more towards the idea of, if we keep stacking up enough of these behavioural experiences, behavioural anecdotal evidence, then it seems harder to argue that this is nothing like human consciousness, this is nothing like human experience. But we can't prove that. And it would be inappropriate to say that the scientific community is divided on this. This is a huge area of contentiousness. What I'd like to finish on is just a few warnings in terms of how we might decide which animals are sentient. This was a study that came out in 2014. It was an enormous collaborative effort studying 36 different species across primates, across birds, across other animals, using two cognitive tests which are designed to be as similar as possible and applied to every single species. What they were was an A0B test and a cylinder test. In the A0B test, you have 3 cups in front of you, an animal sitting opposite from you. You put an object under one cup, they select it, great, you get the object. You then put the object under one cup, move it to another cup, and look at whether the animal goes towards the first cup, A, or goes to now where the new location of that object is, cup B. In the cylinder test, there's simply an item of food in the middle of a perspex cylinder. Does the animal know to reach around and retrieve that object, or do they scramble at the front of the perspex? So they were designed as intelligence tests. For publication, this ended up being referred to as self-control tests. There's still a little bit of debate about what they actually test. But the general idea was to try and run something across all these species that could be comparable and tell us something about the differences in cognition across these species. And this was really well received by the media. This is Ed Young referring to the study. Like, this is how you study the evolution of animal intelligence. Like, this is the way to do it. I disagree. If you delve into their results, what they found was that primates, great apes, performed the top of everything, sort of as expected. Birds performed okay on the cylinder test. Every single non-primate that they tested on the A0B test did incredibly badly. Elephants, which we tend to think of as having quite a broad range of cognitive abilities, failed every single time this task was given to them. And what this really indicated to me was that what we're doing is giving an entirely anthropocentric task to animals for which it has almost no relevance whatsoever. What we did was run a study where we first tested just the basic principle of this task, that if you put an object in a location, if a human hand puts an object somewhere, will an animal go get it? This was almost a resounding no. It took over 150 trials to train up half the birds to even get this basic, here is the reward, I've shown you it's in this cup. It's just not something they paid attention to. Once they had got that, then they were able to pass the task. There was no problem. But they absolutely needed to be trained towards this very human-centered cognitive test. And I think the key moral from this is that any task that we're giving or any set of criteria we're expecting animals to pass is going to be incredibly difficult if we use the same criteria for every single species. Kind of summed up with these two problems of if we test every animal on something separate, it's hard to compare across them, but if we test every animal on the same problem, we still can't really compare across them. Why is this? Really simplistic, but important point is that any animal is evolved in its particular context, and the behaviours that it's performing are serving some sort of evolutionary need. This accounts for the situations that that animal cares about, but also when we're measuring the behaviour, it think it's incredibly important to remember that we can only identify and acknowledge the behaviour that we see the animals exhibit, and certain animals will have incentives to exhibit behaviour far more expressively than others. We take the case of mobbing. In social species, if you see a predator, your response to that predator is likely to be far more exaggerated if you are a social species that needs to use that as also a signal to other members to gather together and also attack this predator, than if you are a solo animal and all you need to do is get away from that predator. So I'll leave it there. What I would like the sort of final remarks to be, the message to leave you with, is that we've got a lot of bird species that demonstrate really complex, learned, intelligent behavioural responses. Even with that in mind, that doesn't change the issues of finding scientific consensus about whether the animals are actually aware in those situations. If we're going to compare very broadly across a wide range of species, what we need to identify is the situations that are actively important to those individuals, rather than applying a blanket approach like the A not B task to try and distinguish between different animals' capabilities. Well, thanks very much.